I'm Ania Bogacka. I'm the author of The Amazing Adventures of Sisi the Mouse, a book that was inspired by a real event, by a real encounter with a very real mouse. I get asked a lot to tell what actually happened and how it all transpired, so today is your lucky day as I've decided to record a video and tell you the story behind the story. Today I'm going to tell you how that real event inspired me to write a short story, how that short story morphed into this almost 200 pages book, and why this book holds such a special place in my heart. So I should actually give you a little warning, it might get emotional. But if you have a few minutes to spare and if you are curious, follow along because the storytelling is about to start. In the fall of 2023, I was visiting my mom in Poland in a small town where I grew up. I live in Canada now. And while I was there, I discovered that I wasn't the only guest in the home. There were mice in my mom's pantry, a sign that the post-harvest migration of mice from fields to homes was underway. We knew what to do. Dust off the live mouse trap, set it up, and wait for mice to take the bait. Our plan was to drive the loaded trap far out into the fields and release our uninvited guests there, where they belong. It sounded like a simple, humane, and foolproof plan. Well, except that things didn't go exactly as we had envisioned. Although we caught the mice and we put the trap in the car itself wouldn't start because the battery had died. So when the battery was charging up, I had no choice but to take matters into my own hands, literal hands, and I had to carry the mousetrap away from the house behind the school gym. I released all mice there at the edge of the field. So actually, I thought I did because one of them had escaped and was hiding in the car. I found out about it the hard way when later that day I was driving to the city to get the groceries. So there I was driving and minding my own business, and suddenly a mouse head peeked out from the heat vent next to my left head. You bet I screamed, and I'm absolutely certain you would have screamed too. But despite that, somehow I still managed to keep the car steady, and I even managed to get my phone out and took a picture. Please don't judge. I'm glad I did, because nobody would believe me, and because the mouse squeezed through the vent, climbed out, and ran across the dashboard and hid in that little nook, where the windshield meets the dashboard far on the passenger side. It was too far for me to reach, so I was looking for something I could use to get the mouse down. And I found it. It was my mom's Chinese handheld fan, which she picked out as a souvenir on Spadina in Toronto during one of her visits. The fan worked, and the mouse jumped down to the floor, ran to the back of the car, and disappeared. I was relieved. I thought we were done. Well, we were not quite done, or farther from being done, because later in the store parking lot, as I was loading the groceries in the car, I saw the mouse again. This time sitting on top of the water bottles that were lying on the back seat. The mouse looked like she was chewing through the plastic wrap, like she was trying to get a drink. At that point, I knew I was dealing with a one-determined mouse, and I decided I would put the groceries on the passenger seat, just in case, just to keep an eye on them. I had a feeling, or more precisely, I knew down deep, that this mouse would try to get to the goodies at first moment she'll have. And guess what? I was right. So I had to use the fan again. But the mouse was a clever mouse, and she tried to climb up my leg while I was driving, as if she wanted to distract me. And let me tell you, you do not want to experience tiny mouse paws climbing up your leg while operating a vehicle. So for the rest of the drive, I was stomping my feet like I was rehearsing for some sort of a dance performance. Eventually, I made it home, and I unloaded the groceries, told my mom what happened. She responded, if not surprised, "I thought I saw 3 tails in the trap this morning." Yeah, thanks, Mom. I wish you told me before I took off to the store. So, for the second time in 24 hours, I had to set up the trap to catch the third and hopefully the final tail. By the evening, the mouse was inside. Now it was time to release it. I didn't want to walk too far, as it was a cold evening and I only had a light t-shirt on. So I walked to the end of my mom's street and released the mouse there, in front of the local church. For most people, that would have been the end of it, but definitely not for me. When I came back to Canada a few weeks later, I shared this story along with the photos with my family and friends. And they were both equally impressed and curious. Impressed because it was a good addition to the unusual stories of Ania, and there were many of them, and curious because everyone wanted to know what happened to that little mouse. There was just so much creative potential in that event. So one evening in November, I felt a strong impulse to write the story down, but to do so from the mouse perspective. I entitled that short story Sisi the Mouse Goes for a Ride. The final scene in that short story was the mouse being released in front of the church by a giant, yours truly. It felt like a cliffhanger, like an invitation to wonder what would happen next. Who will Sisi meet at the church? I too wanted to know, but the words wouldn't flow. And then life got busy and I moved on to other creative outlets, including the texture art that you see behind me. And somehow still the Sisi story stayed at the back of my mind like a quiet nudge that it still needed to be finished. But if I only knew how. And that changed in a way I didn't expect. In November 2024, my mom passed away. My husband and I, we went to Poland and stayed in my hometown for a few weeks following my mom's funeral. My husband knew the story of Sisi the mouse, my little rodent hitchhiker, and he was curious to see the places where the story took place. Retracing those steps felt therapeutic and meaningful, but also reminded me how incomplete that story had been. On the last day in my hometown, in the park by the lake, I saw an owl on my path. It was standing right at the edge of the boardwalk, not bothered by my presence. I had never seen an owl in the wild before, let alone seeing one so close. I probably could have reached out and touched it if I wanted. I didn't, and instead I took a picture and continued on my walk, feeling grateful for seeing such a magnificent creature. When we returned to Canada, the owl sightings continued. I saw one in flight, another one sitting quietly on a branch in midday. I kept coming across images of owls, and people around me started mentioning their own encounters and showing me their photos. I caught myself wondering, what if these owls were somehow connected to my mom? The timing of it was just too specific to be coincidental. What were they trying to tell me? Not long after seeing yet another owl on a hike with my husband, we came across pages of a children's book displayed in the cases in the woods. This book was about a character named Twig, who was having a difficult time making friends at school. My jaw hit the floor, or in that case, a forest ground. Because Twig is a translation of my Polish nickname Witka, the name I used to sign my articles and blog posts in my previous life as a writer and journalist. I knew what it meant. It was that final nudge that I needed. Witka, it's time to finish the story. It could become a book. My mom was a Polish teacher all her life. She loved words, she loved stories, and the thing that she loved the most was reading aloud to children. From everything I've heard, her students cherish those moments too, and even randomly would bring them up years after graduating. Now was the time to write a story my mom would enjoy reading aloud. And that's how in mid-January 2025, I picked up where I had left off. And this time, the words kept flowing. I wrote about Sisi adventures at the church, at the market, high in the air, and eventually I took her back home. I wrote in English. It felt easier to process grief in my second language. I was so lucky to have my dear friend and editor, Sarah, on speed dial, ready to edit and give me feedback in real time. When I wrote, I felt inspired to weave in small details like phrases and expressions and those little quirks that my loved ones possessed, to honor them and to keep them alive. Through my words, I created a Sisi verse. But it was my husband and his amazing illustrations that truly made it real and tangible. As soon as I was done with writing, Mikey took over and spent 3 months visually bringing Sisi's world to life. Meticulously and patiently, he recreated the characteristic places from my hometown. And he was so good at it that when my brother saw one of the illustrations, he pointed out to a house and without a second thought named people who lived there. And he was right. And while I might have preserved the sayings and the character traits, Mikey went one step further and placed our actual friends and family into the illustrations as little Easter eggs. Mikey even drew an almost exact replica of the little blue house on wheels, my mom's car. So yes, that's the story behind the story. The Amazing Adventures of Sisi the Mouse is a children's book and a work of fiction. But for me, this book is much more than that. It's a creative collaboration between people who stood by my side in a dark moment. And it's also a tribute to my hometown and to the places forever etched in my heart. And hopefully, it's a story that my mom would enjoy reading aloud to her students, including voices and all. So if you made it this far, thank you so much for listening. Bye.